morning, everyone. My name is Angela Myers. I am the Director of Operations and Talent at the Battle Creek Community Foundation. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Robin Ferriby. Robin brings decades of experience working with foundations, nonprofits, families, and businesses on governance, charitable giving, and estate planning. He supports organizations in building strong policies and practices while also helping navigate complex decisions tied to philanthropy, business interests, and long-term planning. What stands out about Robin is his thoughtful and practical approach. He helps people not only reach their goals, but also think through the real-world impact of the decisions they make. We are especially glad to welcome Robin back to this nonprofit convening by popular demand. I don't know if you knew that. His insights and practical guidance clearly resonate, and we are grateful to have him with us again. Today, Robin will be sharing on accountability, transparency, and fiduciary responsibility in nonprofit leadership. This is such an important topic for all of us as we think about building trust, managing risk, and sustaining the impact of our organization. Please join me in welcoming Robin.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever been a keynote speaker. I always think of like Barack Obama. I am not him. Okay, so I practice at the law firm of Clark Hill. I'm a nonprofit concentration of my practice. Like 90% of my clientele is nonprofits. At any given time, I'm representing about 100 nonprofits on a variety of matters. But as mentioned, I also do some estate planning, and I also do lobbying and work on nonprofit legislation and regulations. What's also kind of, I think one of the things I can bring, which we discussed a little bit about, is the fact that some of you may know for 19 years, I was one of you. I worked at a nonprofit. I was the vice president and general counsel at the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. So I worked with hand in hand with other nonprofits and such. So that allows me to kind of bring some practical advice. So today's presentation is the exciting one on accountability, transparency, and fiduciary responsibility. Wow, we're all excited now. So just a little bit more exciting than tax law, which is what I usually speak about. So it wouldn't be a lawyer presentation without disclaimers. So just like, buying Ginsu knives, just want to point out that this presentation is for educational purposes. I'm not providing legal advice. You need to speak with your own legal and tax professionals about your organization. Some of what I will share today is going to be, quite frankly, my opinion, okay? And it's my opinion based on 40 years of representing nonprofits and seeing a variety of things, okay? Attorney-client privilege, I can't tell you, hey, this client did this. I can't do that. But I want you to get some lessons learned about things that people have done well and things that people have done not so well, okay? Nonprofit work is hard, okay? I tell people this all the time. This is one of my stump presentations. You are businesses that are doing everything that businesses do, for-profit world does. You have all the issues of employment rights. You have intellectual property things. You have landlord-tenant issues. You have contract issues. You have everything that a business has, and then we're going to dump a whole bunch of tax and other regulatory stuff on top of you that you also have to comply with. What you do is very, very difficult. That said, it is also extremely important. Going back to Tocqueville, when he looked at America when we were first being found, he talked about social institutions and charities being the very fabric that sets the United States apart from the rest of the world. So what you do matters, and I thank you for what you do, okay? But the topics that we have to go over today are going to be complex, and they are designed in part to reflect the fact that we're human. We make mistakes. The guidance that you're provided on transparency, your duties and responsibilities and all, are actually kind of guide rails to help make sure that we don't make mistakes that will jeopardize our organization, jeopardize those that we serve, jeopardize our public trust, okay? That said, because organizations, nonprofits are designed by human beings and are actually staffed by human beings, nonprofits make mistakes, okay? So what we're trying to do is prevent as many of those as we can, and when we have one or we see a mistake, we want to make sure that we correct it as soon as possible, all right? So don't be embarrassed when a mistake happens. They happen all the time. I make mistakes, but we have to recognize them, own up to them, correct them. So what we're going to do is talk about the guidelines that are spelled out in your fiduciary responsibilities and all to try to prevent you from getting there in the first place, okay? So why is this all important? I say this all the time. Your reputation is your stock in trade. Donors recognizing and trusting what you do with their money and their contributions, how you treat and approach those that you serve, those that you, how you deal with your staff, how you deal with past staff, how you deal with future staff, all of that is the reputation on which you have to make your nonprofits work. Without trust in the nonprofit sector or in your organization, you can't do what you need to do, okay? And I've said that all the time, is I've got to stay consistent with the way I approach things so that people trust that we will continue to be consistent moving forward with other organizations or with other situations that we face. It drives your fundraising, it drives your the offering of services, any advocacy efforts you're making with legislators or others. All that's going to be based on the fact that you have their trust, okay? So that's what this ultimately boils down to, is that the community that you serve, those that support you, have trust in your institution and in you as individuals working at that organization. Again, these guide rails that we're going to talk about, the duties and the responsibilities, are designed to make sure that you maintain that trust. Right now, I think the most recent study shows, I think it's 57 or 67% of people trust nonprofit sector in the United States. It's the highest of these different sectors as far as public trust. And it's important that we maintain that as a sector, okay? So, who do you owe this to? And that may sound like a silly question, but I'll tell you why I think this is important. You have regulatory and tax authorities and all that you owe duties of responsibility to, which we'll discuss in a minute. You also owe these responsibilities of transparency out to those you serve so that they understand what you're doing. Kind of with the presentation that we were just talking, they just did this morning. You don't think about that. They were talking to you about, this is what we work with. This is what we're able to do so that you understand that we're not holding grant money back. We only have a limited amount of grant making. It's being transparent to you to show that they're doing their best and this is how they manage the assets so that for the betterment of the Battle Creek community. That's important to have those conversations and to be open and honest with each other about what they can and can't do, okay? Those that support you, so again, the donors, do the donors understand what you can do, what you can't do? Are you consistent with your donors? Do you let Betty and Mary do something different than Bob and Bill? Because that will cause distrust within the organization or with your donor staff, donor pool, okay? And then your board and volunteers and the staff within the organization, do all of them understand what their duties and responsibilities are to the organization as well as to one another? And then timing, temporal. There are duties to what the history of the organization is. There's duties to who you owe right now that you're serving, and then also to the future. Give you an example of that. Endowment spending. If an endowment is being spent at a certain rate for the last 20 years, let's say it's 5%, okay? More money is being put back into that endowment. Those past generations could have spent more, possibly. There's some legal restrictions, right? But by doing it properly, they were able to build up the endowment so that on an inflation basis, today's grantees are receiving inflation-related dollars the same amount that past generations have. If you, in your current situation, if you guys have endowments, start to spend too much now, you're actually, the old phrase, robbing Peter to pay Paul, because you're now taking away the growth for the future generations. that will have that endowment support and would have the, inflation-adjusted dollars available to support them in the future. So you have this temporal duty, in my opinion, that you need to think about is it's not just good for today. What am I doing to set up the organization for success 10, 15, 20 years from now when I'm no longer there? Those are things that you have to think. That's why this is tough. It's balancing all of these competing things and doing it in a way that everybody can then understand and feel that you're being responsible to the community you serve, okay? Boards. I understand there's a lot of board people here. Board people, hold your hands up. All righty, good. First of all, thank you for board service. It's very, very, very important. You guys have some specific duties, and these are like the primary duties that you need to be aware of if you're not aware of it. One of which is a common law duty that's actually been encapsulated in Michigan statutes, and they're the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. We're going to discuss each of those separately in just a second. You also have financial oversight and planning purposes. You guys are supposed to be setting the policies, reviewing the budgets, managing the finances of the organization. And one of your biggest ones is making sure hiring of staff, and specifically the president and CEO of your organization. If you're not familiar with this, one of your primary responsibilities as a board member is a hiring supervision of that president and CEO. You don't just hire them and just let them go do their thing. They're an employee, statutory employee, because they report and are supervised by the board. So I bring that up because I've had a board say, I don't know what the president is doing. Really? You better. That's one of your main jobs. I'm going to be having that conversation with someone this week, okay? So again, these are kind of like high-level things that you need to know about, but it's very important that you take them seriously. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. Inside duty of loyalty is also something known as almost like a subset. It's a duty of confidentiality, which I'll discuss. These actually arise out of Old English common law. They've been around forever. They also apply in some instances, in most instances, to for-profit corporations as well. But they've also been reduced to statute in Michigan. So they actually state that the board of a Michigan nonprofit corporation has these duties, okay? So they are obligations of yours. So duty of care. This is an excerpt from a manual that we put out, or a little pamphlet we put out about board member duties. And I know it's a little dense, but there's certain things that I want you to pick up out of this. And the duty of care, you must discharge the duties of that position in good faith. This goes to transparency. Good faith means it's not personal. You're not getting gain. You're doing it faithfully toward the organization, okay? With the same degree, diligence of care and skill which an ordinarily prudent person would exercise in their similar positions. That's kind of important. So when you're thinking about making a decision for the board, would a reasonable person make the same decision I'm about to do on behalf of this nonprofit? Prudence, which is part of the duty of care, talks about the fact that you are to possess and exercise sound practical judgment and common sense, such as attending meetings, reading materials, otherwise making an effort to learn about the corporation and its activities, and alertness and suggest anticipation of potential problems and issues. If you're not attending meetings, you're not asking questions, if you're ignoring what are possible trouble signs of the organization, then you're not living up to your duty of care, okay? This also, while this is spelled out as being duties of nonprofit directors, it also kind of applies to staff. Staff, you need to also be aware that you should be taking these things seriously, because this is the transparency and accountability to the public that the law expects you to have, okay? Duty of loyalty. This is basically the one that comes down to like conflicts of interest and things of that nature. You're supposed to do everything in faith to the organization. Your loyalty is to it. It's not up to you personally. It's not to your friends. It's not to your relatives. It's not to your businesses. You have to conduct your duty of loyalty to the nonprofit itself. It becomes like your primary focus in your role, okay? The bolded line, directors are required to put the interests of the organization ahead of their personal interests. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be on the board. Just put it that simply, okay? That your loyalty is to it. If you're thinking about this and making benefit for you personally, then you shouldn't be there. And most of you aren't. You're there, the vast majority of you aren't. You're there because you care about the organization, you care about its mission, you want to see it succeed. Thank you for doing, like I say, what you do. But don't let something in the future make you forget that, which is, we're human. Things do that. So duty of obedience, this is kind of a bigger one that, going back to duty of loyalty for a second, that's the confidentiality thing. And I've had this conversation with lots of board members over the years. You're supposed to keep the information that you learn, because for your loyalty to that organization is you have to keep that information confidential. You can't go in and say, oh, by the way, last week at the board meeting, we were looking at this grantee or this program, and we just, Mary didn't like it, Bob supported it, we argued about it for 4 hours. That undercuts the reputation of the organization in the community, because now you're pitting board members and all to each other. So internal communications and things of that nature have to remain confidential in order to maintain the reputation of the organization. I actually had that one time where a subcommittee split equally on a grant. It was a drag-out fight. And guess what? 2 of the board committee members decided to talk about it in the community. We spent 6 months of damage control about the fact that half the committee hated your project and half your committee loved your project. Fortunately, the organization got the money. It went to like 6-5 vote. But why is that conversation even going out? That should have stayed inside the shop, okay? So that's part of that duty of loyalty, is you don't want to have those internal conversations become a problem in the public. So duty of obedience is adhering to the mission and purposes of the organization. We'll cover that a little bit more in some of the warning signs and things. Your governing documents. So how many of you board members have ever read the bylaws and the articles of incorporation of your organization? Thank you. So, okay. I spend a lot of time on bylaws. Usually when I go home and my wife asks me how my day was, and if I say bylaws, she goes and pours me a drink. It's like one of my least favorite projects to do, but they're extremely important. But you need to read them and understand, because a lot of times the bylaws, at least our bylaws, will say, well, if you're the president of the board or the chair of the board, what are your duties? They're spelled out in there. And that's why this is important. If you're going to you have to abide by your obedience, the governing documents, you probably should have read them. Same with governing policies, our corporate policies. State and federal laws. Now, I don't expect you all to run out and spend the next 5 hours reading the Michigan Nonprofit Corporation Act, but general principles and policies are legal requirements of the organization you should be familiar with. You rely on your staffs to really know those. That's their thing, and they help guide you with that process. But you generally need to understand what those rules are and agree to abide by them. Okay? If I ever hear another nonprofit person, which I hear, say, well, yeah, we're not going to do that. No, you will do that. Because otherwise, I'm in front of the Attorney General trying to explain to him what you did wrong. Okay? So, that's a quick cover of those 3 duties. So let's talk about a couple other more specific statutes. And this is the one that's going to scare you. Okay? I'm just going to tell you, it's going to scare you. It scares me all the time. There's something called the Michigan Charitable Organizations and Solicitations Act. This is an act that requires most charities, there's some exceptions, to register with the Attorney General's office. And it really relates to getting a solicitation license. I know last time I was here we talked about solicitation licenses and such a lot. One of the things that's in that act is they talk about what's known as a prohibited transaction. And a prohibited transaction covers officers, trustees, personnel, and related personnel that may be prohibited as constituting activity contrary to the proper administration of the charitable organization. Proper administration of the charitable organization is a lot broader than solicitations. Gives the AG's office a lot of authority to oversee what you guys are doing. Okay? The Nonprofit Corporation Act has additional things. There's something like 23, 24 different statutes that govern nonprofits in the state of Michigan alone, on top of the federal regulations. Okay? One of those is, and we're going to cover this as one of the things to worry about, is that you are not allowed to divert or misdirect contributions to a purpose or organization other than that for which the funds were contributed or solicited. Okay? Now, in the typical case, what people would look at that and say, well, that means I can't go out, and it's really kind of the primary focus of people like at the AG's office, is that I can't go raise money and say, I'm going to raise money for charity, and then I use it in my own pocket. All right? I've diverted charitable dollars to a purpose other than intended. That's what it generally applies to, and what it's kind of focused at, is to prevent people fraudulently raising money and then using it for their own personal gain, right? But interestingly, to a purpose, misdirect contributions to a purpose, it doesn't say to a nonprofit purpose. So if you actually take charitable dollars and you use for a certain charitable purpose and you use it for a different charitable purpose, that's technically a violation of this act. Because you basically defrauded somebody and said, we use the money one way, and we're going to use it for something else. Okay? Why it's the scary part is that there is potential civil and criminal liability under the statute. Depending on the dollar amount, it's actually a 5-year felony. So, happy day. Now, this generally does not come up with nonprofit members and all. There's exclusions for volunteers acting under direction of the nonprofit, things of that nature. But this tells you what the seriousness of this is. And what this does is, when you look at these statutes, is it's actually going back to you being transparent, honest, and accountable to people that you raise money and all with. It's really a codification, again, of those 3 duties to maintain your reputation in the community. Okay, to keep that trust, which is important to your activities. Can I cite an example? You raise money for the children's program of your organization, you've got surplus, and you decide that you're going to use it for something else. You're going to use it for the adult activities. Does that make it, but you told people you're going to raise it for this purpose, and now you're using it for something else. Or you're still running the children's program and you're borrowing money from it, right? Because they didn't tell you could loan it to other programs. In the federal government, we would call that taking money from the Social Security Administration and using it to fund the general budget, right? I mean, you're all upset about that, right? Why would you think that people wouldn't be upset if you're taking their dollars that they gave for something and start using it for something else? We're actually going to cover it a little bit of an example in a minute. So this statute is one of my favorites because it's got a really long name. You may have heard of it as UPMIFA, so Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. This statute, again, provides guidance and guide rails for you, but it is the default rules on how you manage institutional funds. Institutional funds are basically any charitable restricted dollar that you receive. It is not just about endowments. Everybody always thinks that the statute only deals with endowments. It's any restricted money that you receive is covered by the statute. Endowments are a subset of it, okay? What the statute does, it provides default rules. First of all, gift agreements are always controlling in this situation. So the donor enters into a written agreement with you saying this is what we're going to use this money for, we're making a contribution. That could be as simple as a letter when they send it to you and say, I'm giving you $10,000 for the children's program, and you say thank you, gift agreement, okay? What people forget is solicitations. We're raising money for the children's program endowment, and someone sends in a check. That's a gift agreement. Solicitation and response, okay? But what it does is it provides some default rules for both investment, expenditures, and modifications. How much money you can spend. There's factors that you're supposed to consider. What it also does, and I've talked about this all the time, is that it gets rid of some of the old concepts about endowment management specifically. So historic gift value is no longer a thing. It is for accountants. Not trying to pick on my friends at the accounting table. But it has nothing to do with how you manage the money. Principal and income, if you have a fund agreement that says you only spend the income off of the fund, the principals will remain intact forever, that no longer limits you to income and principal. The reason being is no one can tell you what that means. Income, is that ordinary interest? Is that dividends? Is that original issue discount on a bond? Is it unrealized capital gains? Is it realized capital gains? No one knows what income is, so it's ambiguous. So instead what you do is you look at your fund and you decide, based on market conditions, inflation, things of that nature, we're going to spend this much of our endowment this year and allocate it. So if you haven't learned that in the management of your investments or your institutional funds, it's something that your organization should review again. What this also means is you have duties to use of monies for the purposes of which they gave them to you. That means you have to keep records on this. You have a gift agreement from a donor, that needs to go in your permanent archive file, okay? Because again, you know that duty of the people in the future? 30 years from now when they go, what are we supposed to use this money for? And they don't know because you didn't keep the record, that's a problem. I've done transitions of organizations that were created in the 1880s. Try to find the records for something from the 1880s. It's a nightmare. So if you don't want that being left on your desk, think about your future generation. It's sort of a duty to them to make sure you do it as well. You have to segregate the funds and track them on the financial records. There's no like commingling that can maybe for investment purposes, but you need to make sure that you know this money was for this, that money was for that. Proper investment by fund type. Part of the UPMIF talks about the fact that you look at the investment of that institutional fund based on its duration. So if I have short-term cash programs, this is money for the program that we're doing in the next 2 years, why would I put it into the endowment investment pool with the monies that are supposed to be held in perpetuity? They're in two entirely different time periods. So I need an endowment investment portfolio and I need a short-term investment portfolio. And again, the reason this is important is when you go to spend that money, it needs to be there. It hasn't dropped with the endowment investment portfolio because you put the short-term cash in with something that took a 20% market beating this year, and now you have 20% less to spend because then you have to take the money from somewhere else to make it up, right? Which breaks down your credibility. It breaks down your trust in the community because now you're, again, robbing Peter to pay Paul in order to make that work. So I always talk about not mixing short-term cash with long-term and permanent endowments. If you don't have the ability to create the right investment policies and statements, I'm going to do a little plug for the Community Foundation. That's why they have agency endowment funds. Let them use their professional expertise for doing those type of things and manage your endowments. Give the money to them so you don't have to manage an investment portfolio that you may not have the capacity and all to manage. Okay? And then the last one is an interesting one. And again, it goes to credibility because it's about proper record keeping and being able to manage the organization moving forward appropriately. And that is, don't mix quasi-endowment money with donor-restricted money, okay? So for those of you who are not familiar, if a board says, hey, we got some surplus assets and we're gonna set them up in an endowment for X program, and it's done by the board, that's a quasi or board designated endowment. If a donor comes to you and says, I want to make a fund or gift and it's for this purpose and it's a donor restriction, that's a donor restricted fund, that's a true endowment, okay? What I have seen repeatedly is a board will set money aside for, let's say, the arts program. Then they go out and they solicit for the arts endowment, and they put all the donor money in it. Why having these separated is important is that a board restriction on an endowment is not permanent. A future board can take it up off. So when you need it for general operations, you could take that money back, okay? But guess what? If you put it all in the same pot and mixed it all up, how are you gonna sort it out later, okay? So again, that future staff member 20 years from now is looking for money for the children's program as opposed to the arts program, and they don't know what inside that arts endowment was board restricted versus donor restricted. You've just now handicapped the organization moving forward. And you're supposed to be loyal and obedient to it and hoping it to fulfill its charitable mission, and you just prevented that from happening. Okay, warning signs. There's a lot of warning signs that go ignored. Some that maybe is not as readily apparent as you might think. One is chronic cash flow stress, despite the fact that you have balanced budgets. Budget comes out balanced every year, but the staff is constantly scrambling to try to figure out where the money is for this particular project, where it's coming in, with the timing it's coming in. That's going to lead to decisions that may not have been in fulfilling, keeping true to these restrictions and all the donors and all placed on things. So you have to be mindful of the stress that's there. That's not something that just pops up. Staff have to let you know about it. The one that I think is also important, because I think it's ignored, is significant annual shortfalls in the budget, right? We're not making money. One of my favorite things is that nonprofits have to actually make profit. People don't think about it that way. We'll talk about it a little bit more too. But if you have shortfalls all the time, then there's obviously something wrong, structurally wrong, that needs to be addressed. Here's the one that I think people forget. If I have annual surpluses every year, all the time, I got a problem too. Why is that a problem? We budgeted for a certain amount of program activity for the organization. It included us hiring 3 staff members, doing these things, doing that things. We didn't do it. We still got the work done, but we didn't spend the money. Then that means either your forecasting was wrong or you're stressing the organization. You're making the staff work too hard. They're going to get, things are going to fall through the cracks, things of that nature. If the program was important, you had a proper business plan in place, you budgeted for it, and then you didn't spend the money, there's something wrong because these money should have been spent. And people ignore that, but it puts stress on the organization that will lead to problems downstream, because something's going to fall through the cracks. Borrowing internally from restricted funds. If you have money that's for this, don't use it for that. You have to stay true to those donor intents. One of the things that constantly comes up is I want to take a loan from my endowment. No, no, and no, okay? First of all, is considered a violation of public policy because you cannot be contractor or lender and borrower at the same time. You can't lend money to yourself, okay? But it also upsets the way that you manage your endowment moving forward, maintaining your fiduciary responsibility to those endowments, because what happens if the money doesn't get paid back? And it's also, again, a reflection of the fact that the organization has other stressors because you haven't raised the money, you're trying to dip into your endowment instead. Okay, so no. That was pretty quick and blunt, sorry, but one of my partners refers to me as the Mr. Endowment at the foundation because I helped write up MIFA and I'm an endowment fan. You just shouldn't do it. Just don't do that. If you're going to do that, call me and we'll have a talk. Growing your reliance on one-time revenue to fund operations. So you get some big project in, it's going to help fund your operations, it's going to part of your finance person, all that kind of stuff. Part of the marketing department is going to be paid for it and all. Maybe it's 1 or 2 years. You have to plan for what happens when that ends. Okay? When I was at the Community Foundation, we used to run really large regional collaboratives. Every person that we hired for those regional collaboratives were term-limited employees. They were on a contract. They knew their contract ended at year 3 when the funding ran out for that program. If we found other revenue in the meantime and wanted to maintain them, we would hire them back on. But we weren't burdening future generations of the organization with staff that we didn't know we were going to have funding for. These are hard decisions, but you have to plan it that way because you're running a business and you can't saddle the business with expenses that aren't going to have revenue to cover it in the future. Now, most employees are at will. You can always just get rid of them. Short-term programs, if it runs out of money, get rid of them. But it's a lot nicer for them as well as you to say, you do realize that in 2030 your contract ends. So that they're not surprised, you don't have a bad reputation, all of those type of things. So again, too many nonprofits get these big, huge grants, build out all the staff, and then don't plan for what happens when it's done. And then you have stresses. It's also on those programs making sure the people, like the grantees here, if they have, grant makers here, have a program that you in the community know that the program's going to end at some point in time. So you're not reliant upon it. Okay? So, other projects. Capital projects launched without securing funding. I'm going to talk about it in general on not only capital projects, but all projects. Okay? Deferred maintenance and underfunded reserves. You got to make sure that you keep up on that stuff because at some point in time, the bill's going to come due. Okay? Overconfidence in future fundraising and contingency planning. I used to do these weird spreadsheets for any time I did my asset development plan where I looked at historical averages and all these different things, and I would project out 5 years how much money we're going to raise based on historical information. And if I put this much additional staff and all, I'm going to be a little cocky here for a second. I was always within like 10% of my projections. It's not hard. But if you go, oh, well, we're just going to raise X. I actually had a CEO or a board chair one time come up to me and told me when we were about $400 million in size, it says, we're going to be $1 billion in size in 3 years. I said, really? Let me tell you how that works. And have to explain it and get him to come back down to understand that that's not practical. You can't just make up numbers. You have to understand behind it what you're going to do, because if you start to then budget as if it's already happened and it hasn't happened, then the organization is stressed, okay? These are kind of touchy-feely things, the last 3. Going off mission, chasing dollars, and complacency. Going off mission. We are a children's charity, but someone wants to come to us and talk to us about doing an adult literacy program. We can do that, right? We can handle that. So let's try that. We'll do that too. Well, can you? And what does that do to the organization? If you're the best, children's program, be the best children's program. Don't try to be everything else. That will get you in trouble. Chasing dollars is kind of the same thing. Someone came to me and they said they're going to give me $5 million for X. Do we do X? Do we know how to do X? Do we know how we could figure out how doing X? But it's $5 million and we have a budget to fill. You're going to have more problems with that than you ever thought, because you chased the dollar and not fulfilled your mission. Going back to obedience and loyalty to the organization, you didn't stay obedient to the mission. You chased a dollar. Stop doing that. I know it's hard. You got budgets to fill and all that kind of stuff, but that probably causes, these couple things cause more problems for nonprofits than you can possibly imagine. Okay? And it then erodes the confidence you have in the community, because then the program blows up. And now you've compounded, because now no one trusts you to give you money to do the core mission stuff that you're really good at. So I'll tell stories that are not attorney-client privilege, because it was when I was actually a staff member. Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, Detroit and surrounding area. We would have people come to us and want us to do these big, huge education initiatives, okay? Guess what? There's a foundation in Detroit called the Skillman Foundation that all they do is children's education programming. I would say, no, that's great. Would love that $10 million. Why don't you call my friend over at the Skillman Foundation? They know what they're doing. Let them do it, because it's not my competency, okay? That's how you collaborate within a community, and you make the community stronger by collaborating with one another and not trying to poach into somebody else's territory. That's the chasing mission, or going off mission. Complacency. We've always done it this way. We don't need to review all of our procedures. They've been with us for 42 years. They know what they're talking about. No. You get complacent, and laws change, regulations change, the community changes. You have to stay constantly up on it. And credit to the Battle Creek Community Foundation, they're re-examining themselves right now and saying, this is what we're good at, this is how we come back to core mission, this is what we need to do, and they're making those hard choices and changes. Sorry, Mary, I'm giving you props in the back, sorry. Okay, they've been a client now for a few years, and I gotta tell you, I love them. I tell everybody that they're one of my favorite clients. They know what they're doing, and they're doing all the tough stuff right now. So kudos, Battle Creek. So those are some of the things that I think you need to be worried about, because they will bubble up and cause problems behind the scenes, and then you have to deal with them. So, action steps. Borrowing again from my previous thing. We used to refer to it as proper care and feeding of trustees, okay, or directors. You don't just get people to be on your board because it's a ribbon in their hat to be on the board, okay? If you're on the board because you like having, it's a ribbon thing, right? That's not the reason to be on the board. When you bring people on the board, you have to bring them on the board in a proper way. They have to be there for a reason, that they have the talents and skills that you're looking for, things of that nature. But then the staff, and this is both ways. Board members, you should think about my responsibilities, but also staff, you need to understand what your responsibility is to your board members, is that you need to properly onboard them. You need to make sure that they understand what the mission is. You need to make sure that they understand what the regulatory requirements are. I was talking to someone earlier, this thing about when the staff was talking to you all about, we only have this much unrestricted and field of interest money, we have this much and this much and this much, and so we really have a limited grant-making budget. That's a good transparency thing. But I know of a president that got hired at a community foundation who had a $48 million operating budget and thought it was all unrestricted when she got hired. She never even looked at the audit to realize that there were these different restricted pots and that her discretionary budget was really about $5 million.
Well,
okay.
It was not me, Rob.
It was not her. It was not her. Okay. But what I'm saying is, you as board members need to understand what you're getting yourself into too, and the staff should explain this to you when you're coming on board. You need to understand whatever your nonprofit is, what we look like, what our mission is, what our restrictions are, the challenges. That's part of that knowing. Then you have to remain constantly informed. Staff needs to explain to things that you need to know about, and you need to ask questions. Remember that thing about under duty of, I'm sorry, which one was it? Duty of obedience, where you're supposed to, have what a reasonable person would anticipate. You would ask questions. You would know and inquire. If I hear one more board member tell me, I do not know what the president is doing, okay, that's that part of that, okay? Now, having said that, there's a balance. Board members, ask questions, know what the finances are, supervise the president, manage the budget, policies and procedures, but don't be walking around the hallways telling the staff what they're doing today. I've had that too. there's a balance. If you hire good, competent staff, let them do their job. Do not wander the halls. I've actually had that happen. I showed up at 11 o'clock, had a cup of coffee, I went and talked to the finance department, No. Let them do their jobs. Budgeting. All programs and activities of the organization should go to the board with a budget. That sounds common sense, but how many organizations will get that special funding project and there's a budget for the special funding project and the money is kind of like not core budget because it's a special project budget and we don't tell the board about it? Well, they don't need to know. We've already worked this out with the funder. Board is responsible for all finances. Special project finances, main core budget, everything. They know about everything. Okay? Because if not, you have this little special project that goes sideways and then the board goes, I didn't know what was going on. You should have. So if you do that and you get special project budgets, you need to bring them to the board. And the last one is, all of this also applies to staff and volunteers. How many of you have volunteers and do the volunteers covered by, let's say, your confidentiality of interest policy or confidentiality policy, and you didn't tell them that, right? Because you didn't onboard the volunteers correctly. The staff needs to know all these things. You know, the staff, we used to actually, at the community foundation where I worked, we used to, when a new staff member, and I don't care what level within the organization they were, they met with every vice president who explained what our department does, what we do, how this fits with everybody else, so that you understand how this organization works, so that you can know your place in the organization to help us fulfill our duties. That's important. Always invest in the staff. Okay, so regulatory requirements compliance. Okay, I got 10 minutes. I was supposed to give you some time. So some things if you don't know. You are to make sure certain information is transparent to everybody, including publicly available your Form 1023 exemption application, your IRS determination letter, your 990 series tax returns, and the audited or reviewed financial statements. A lot of you probably don't know that your Form 1023 exemption application is required to be readily available. If you don't have it in your files, you need to go find it or ask the IRS to send you a copy. If they can't send you a copy, because they can, if they can find it. If they say they can't find it, you can at least have that letter, so if someone asks you for it, you can say, we don't have it, and neither does the IRS, sorry. At least you've done good faith in trying to have it. Your solicitation license and registration, your charitable gaming license when necessary, okay? Policies. These are a short list, policies that I think you should all have. A confidentiality policy. As public charities, anybody that's a public charity in here, under Sarbanes-Oxley, you're supposed to actually have a whistleblower and record retention policy. I put them together because whistleblower kind of goes against confidentiality, but it basically says that, you know, if you find out something we're breaking the law, we're doing something illegal, we have to report it. And by the way, whistleblower policies are generally worded as, you will report it, not you may. You will, because that's how we as an organization know that we have a problem so that we can correct it. And staff should know about those things. Conflict of interest, duality of interest policies, real quick. Conflict of interest is when you're receiving some sort of financial benefit back. That's a conflict, right? Duality of interest is, I'll pick on the community foundation, we're making a grant to the local art museum. One of our board members is on the board of the local art museum, okay? That's a duality of interest. They're not a financial benefit, but they should disclose that. There should be, you know, appreciation of the fact that they have this kind of conflict in their head, okay? So that's a duality of interest. Private foundations, you also need to deal with self-dealing, business holdings, and administrative services agreements if you have like staff that you share with the family office or with a corporation. Those should all be taken care of as well. Outside employment and non-service, nonprofit service and government service. This is the growing area. What happens if one of your staff members decides to run for a local school board? Does that create a conflict? Do they have to recluse themselves from certain things? You get my point. There's issues there because nonprofits cannot be involved in political campaign activities. So if you have someone that says they're going to run, what are you going to do with them? Can they do that at the office? Can they use the mailing list? You get my point. Investment policy statements and spending policy, gift acceptance, standard fund agreements, fiscal sponsorships, all of these should be reduced, and there should be standard policies for these things if you don't have them. The reason I would talk about the standard fund and gift agreements is that, remember what I was talking about being consistent with your donors? This is the agreement that we use, and yes, Robin told me don't chase dollars and just rewrite everything for you, okay? Because exceptions will kill you. Because how do you track the exceptions to your policies? And when I started the Community Foundation, we had 350 funds. And we were like $250 million. 19 years later, we had 1,700 funds, and we were $1 billion in size. How am I going to track every little exception that I made to some sort of policy and not have it screw up and then take away my trust with everybody else in the community? So you have to be a little bit tough and say, nope, we don't change that. But I'm not going to give you the money. Well, okay, sorry. Now I can say that because we were big and we had a lot of money, and it's harder when you're smaller. But keep in mind that the exceptions will kill you, okay? Procedures, archive gifts and grant agreements. Again, that's the thing about 20 years from now, someone doesn't know what they're supposed to use the money for. Those should be permanent part of your records. Segregated fund maintenance, the investment issues I was talking about. This is the one I want to talk about, business plans. As I said earlier, you're a nonprofit corporation. That means no one has stock ownership in you. No one can sell you and receive capital gains, right? That's what that means. If you do not make a profit, you go bankrupt. It's an oxymoron in the statute, okay, or in the way we refer to ourselves. So when you are looking at a capital campaign for a new building, or you're looking at developing this new program, borrow from the business or the for-profit world. There should be a business plan, okay? And some of the questions I always used to ask people to ask is, does the program further our mission, so we're not going off mission? Are we qualified to undertake it? Can we or do we have the talent necessary to run the program? Because we need the people to actually make the program work. Do we have the resources, whether that's staff, computer systems, audit requirements, money to run it? Or can we go get them? We know where we can go get those things. And is it worth any opportunity cost? Because if you divert staff and resources to that, then you're not doing something else. And that all should be part of that business plan discussion, because if not, you've either creeped away from mission, you're not dealing with your finances correctly, you're not living up to your duty of loyalty, and from a transparency standpoint, that's going to get you in trouble with all the other stakeholders in your community, because you've failed and let them down, okay? So that's kind of a quick way to think of a business plan and some of the things besides just the budget that you should consider. Audits, make sure you have good auditors that they actually know what they're talking about. They've dealt with a nonprofit before, not just somebody that has never looked at a nonprofit before. You should periodically change them. Now, I don't know how often that should be. Talk to your auditors, but every 5 years, you rebid it. Because again, complacency. Having a new fresh set of eyes come in every once in a while. And I know there's more cost when you switch audit firms, but having a new fresh set of eyes is a good thing every once in a while. Public trust systems. So a lot of your stuff, if you don't know this, is actually out available to the public, okay? One of the groups that is a big one is, it's now called Candid. It used to be called GuideStar. Okay, everybody familiar with GuideStar? Go to GuideStar.org, and you can basically look up every nonprofit in the country. There are 990s available, all that kind of stuff. They do rating services, though. A lot of people don't know this. First, you can argue with GuideStar as to what their rating of you is. you can clarify that and say, wait a minute, we have that. We don't have that. Same with Charity Navigator. You can also, right now, the IRS is really slow at putting your 990s out into public space, which then GuideStar pulls over onto their database. You can actually directly submit your 990 to GuideStar, and they will post it for you. It doesn't have to come from the IRS. So there's ways for you to make sure that that publicly available information is out there. The Better Business Bureau actually does sometimes list charities as whether or not they're good or bad, and you can contest their ratings and things of that nature. If you haven't, have you ever looked up your organization to see where you stand on any of these? You may want to do that. And then the last one is that there are, often in different groups, there are what are called peer review certifications. I'm old. So I remember the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval. Anybody else remember those, right? Okay, you know, my toaster was approved by the, you know. There are groups that do this for different charitable groups, okay? So in the community foundation world, actually a proud thing for Michigan, Michigan developed what were known as community foundation standards. And if you participated in certain programs through the Council of Michigan Foundations, you had to be community foundation standard approved by CMF to be able to participate. Those standards were actually then borrowed by the Council on Foundations at a national level and then ultimately licensed over to the Council on Foundations. So the Council of Foundations is a national organization of foundations across the country, actually uses the Michigan developed, they've evolved over the years, community foundation standards. And you can get a little bug, just like the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval, to put on your website and all that kind of stuff saying that you meet standards. Elizabeth just shared with me that they just got approved after their review, and tell you this is a brutal review. They review everything, okay? They just got approved with no changes. So kudos, they're community foundation certified. So that's the thing too for you for transparency, is you go to these groups, get yourself certified or reviewed if you have one, make sure you're properly certified, because that's showing to the general public, you're being transparent, we've met their standards. And that's a way for you to build your trust. That's actually my last slide, and I'm 1 minute over, which is actually kind of good for me. Oh, actually I have 15 minutes, don't I? I have some Q&A time. So I did better than I thought. So I hope that was helpful for everybody, and we'll answer a couple questions.
For small nonprofits that are just starting to get organized and things separated, when they develop their board, can you explain about a working board? Yeah, in some nonprofits you have working boards, okay? Like that's particularly true in family foundations, right? You don't have staff. You got $1 million private foundation, it's the staff. It's the board is the staff. They're doing the grant reviews, they're managing the money, all that kind of stuff. In that case, so a couple technical things first. For a Michigan public charity nonprofit, law requires you have at least 3 board members, so you have that, okay? You have to have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer, okay? So you have to have 3 people that have those roles, okay? What I would suggest is that you make sure that you have bylaws that explain, or other resolutions that explain to everybody what their roles are. So what is the treasurer responsible? What is the secretary responsible? What is the president responsible for? Okay. Can I comment about presidents for a second? Presidents are required by law, and they're really there's a definitional gap here. The president is the chief executive officer of the organization. It is the person that is responsible for the day-to-day operations and is the person that is responsible to the board for carrying out the board actions, i.e. Mary, okay? That's her job, okay? The board chair is not the president. The board chair runs the board meetings, okay? But going back to this definitional issue, who's the president of a school? Principal, usually, okay? Who's the president of a church organized as a nonprofit corporation? Usually the head of staff or the head pastor. So you have this like title that doesn't match up with president, but they're the president, okay? The board chair, unless they're actually the president that is doing the day-to-day operations and signing the contracts and paying the bills, they're not the president, they're a board chair. So then it's about recruiting the right people. You want people that are driven by the mission, right? And that bring, generally, the way I usually approach it is, what skill sets do you need? Do you need someone that's good at programming, executing the program? Do you want somebody that is good at finance? Do you need a development person? Do you need a board person that can raise money? So for a small organization, you need to kind of look at your skill set. And I don't know, do you have any staff on top of this? Some of the staff then can control, the back stuff. But it's really about, there's also something to be said about having representation of the community you serve, I think. This is, we're in opinions, this is not law. Like, you want it to reflect the community you serve as well. So if you're a social service agency, you should probably have some people on there that know about social services, right? You don't want a bunch of accountants only. That's not going to help you. Universities. I don't need a bunch of alumni. It's nice if they're alumni, but it's also nice if I have people that are accountants, that know what the accounting rules are, that can help raise money and things of that nature, that care about our mission, right? So there's a balance. Is that answering your question? Is that helping?
Yes, thank you. But I want to add to it.
Okay.
So, like, our board is diversified, and actually with developing the board, it was anticipated with having people who had different skill sets to where staff don't have those skill sets. So like we have attorneys, we have people that work in economics, people finance, it's a diverse board, but we bring, the intention of bringing those people to the board was because of the skill sets that they have.
That is, yeah, but again, overarching, they need to have an appreciation of the organization. They need to want to support the organization, which I'm sure that they all did, or they wouldn't have said yes, okay? So, again, I kind of harken back sometimes to my own practical experience. When I was at the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, hold your breath, our board was authorized up to 65 people. We had 62, okay? We covered 7 counties of Southeast Michigan. Okay, so we looked for those things, like we need people for the audit committee, we need people for finance, we need people that were development people. We also wanted to represent all of our 7 counties. This is that constituent part, right? I want people that can represent everybody in our 7 counties and have an interest in those 7 counties. But they also had to understand that maybe they're from Macomb County, but the organization was about the 7 counties. So you had to bring us your perspective about Macomb, but at the same time, you had to understand that we represent everybody. And so it's this, again, it's a unique kind of person to find. You can say the same thing about an organization that has a particular charitable mission, but you have different constituencies that you serve. So you may bring somebody on who's like a great children's welfare person, but your organization is welfare in general. You would want to make sure that they also understand how that plays with family welfare support systems and all those different things, so that they have a loyalty to the whole, an obedience to the whole, but bringing their own personal perspective to help. Does that help? We're really in the mushy part right now. We're like really soft at this. It's a balancing thing. So, yeah.
And one last question. How long should somebody serve on the board?
Oh, now, boy, you just opened Pandora's box. Oh, my gosh. The eternal debate, or for the eternal debate of term limits or not to have term limits, what shall it be? Again, it's about complacency. Are they staying up and are actually staying relevant, maintaining and understanding that the organization is evolving, things of that nature? Because if they're not, if they're holding you back, they need to be gone, okay? Now, here's what will happen. I've had this happen. We have no term limits. Oh my gosh, Betty's been here forever. She comes to the meetings and she wants to knit in the corner. I mean, we need to get rid of her. We need to have term limits. Okay, well, that way, because we don't want to come to her and force her off, right? So then they'll pass term limits. Well, then they have term limits. It's 3 3-year terms. And then, oh, well, you know, Bob, he's been here 9 years. We got to get rid of him. Oh my gosh, we can't do that. We love Bob. Bob's great. So maybe we'll change the rules, and it's now if you serve as a committee chair, you can stay on the board. So we'll make Bob a committee chair, and we'll keep Bob for another 4 years, okay? And then at some point in time, it's like, why do we have term limits? And then term limits go away, okay? Sorry, this is real. This is like what I deal with, okay? What I'm going to say is that it's about the board members and their proper care and feeding. You can start out with term limits if you want, or you can impose them, and so that you have fresh people coming in. But it's also about, I'm going to be blunt again, Robin's getting old. Robin's starting to just, my wife says that when I turn 80, oh, the world's going to be a bad place. Anyways, you have to be able to have a frank conversation with somebody. Grow up, be adults. If you're not doing your job, you need to go, okay? So, to that, in fact, something I didn't mention on the board, how many of you have committee charges where your committees actually have a charge for the board as to what their role and responsibility is and who they report to, okay? Mary's going like this. Okay, I know, Mary, you're good. Okay, but do you do that for your board members? Do you have a trustee charge telling them what their roles and responsibilities and their obligations are as part of the onboarding process? You will attend board meetings. You will serve on at least one committee meeting, things of that nature. And then do you review them and hold them accountable? In a bigger organization, the governance committee would do that. In a smaller organization, guess what? That's one of those unspoken jobs of the board chair. The board chair goes and says, Betty, you got to stop knitting at board meetings. It's not helpful. Okay? Sorry. That's my kind of take on it. You can have board limits, term limits if you want, and then at some point in time, you're going to not want them back and forth. Yeah.
Hello. I think this was really great. I'm wondering if there's a resource somewhere to show us examples of things like confidentiality agreement, those board member responsibilities.
Yeah.
And any of those sorts of documents that people could pull from.
Regina's bouncing out of her chair.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the room.
Where's Regina at?
Right here.
Okay.
She's literally like daggers across the room at me. Mary, here you go.
Okay, we have sample policies in Word format on our website that we vet. Oh, sorry, Regina from Nonprofit Network. We can help you figure out how to manage a working board because they have the same policies and processes that Robin was talking about. We can help. Promise we can help. Yes, please. So, and I know you're going through a lot. We can help. And so, yes, just call us. One phone call, we can really help. We are not lawyers, we're driver's ed teachers, and it's a lot better.
Yeah.
I'm going to add one more resource, if that's okay. Robin, is Board Source as well. A ton of free resources on the Board Source website that nonprofits can use.
And I will tell you three others. If you're a nonprofit corporation, you can join the Michigan Nonprofit Association. Mm-hmm. That's another group that will help you with these things. They also have National Council on Nonprofits, thank you. There's a national version of it as well. And if you're a foundation, you can also join the Council of Michigan Foundations or the Council on Foundations. They have resources like that. Elizabeth, we're going to send my PowerPoint out to everybody. We're going to send your PowerPoint out to you. I will also attach to that or send it to Elizabeth. We have it's like a 14-page little pamphlet called Board Responsibilities for Michigan Nonprofits. So I'll send that to you too. And she can say, and it kind of goes over what I just talked about in a little pamphlet form that you would literally print out and hand to new board members. Okay, and say, here, okay? So, yes.
You're not suggesting that every organization needs 15 different bank accounts.
No.
Thank you. If you could just clarify
Yeah.
that, because I
So-
know some people said, well, then that's what we have to do.
No. Segregating means financial records, okay? So Mary, you have what? How many funds do you have at the Battle Creek Community Foundation now?
Over 1,000.
Okay, so does Mary have 1,000 bank accounts? No.
No.
Okay, so she has, different investment accounts, and what I'm saying is you have to segregate them on your financial system so that you know this money. Now, you can commingle short-term money. So if you have short-term projects, you can have them all in the same money market pool, some second account, but you need to be able to say, this is budgeted for this purpose, and we're going to charge expenses and costs of that on our financial books, this and that. What I don't like is when you take short-term cash programs and put it in with your endowment investment pool. The endowment long-term money should be in its own separate pool. That's my.
Regina said, if you're still using Excel spreadsheets, they can help. One more time, who are you, where are you from? Most people.
Regina from Nonprofit Network. Some of you may not even be using QuickBooks yet or any other accounting softwares. This can also be done with an Excel spreadsheet easily.
This is that duty to the future, okay? I will also tell you, think of what you're going to do 5 years from now when you're this much bigger and you're this much more complicated. Again, when I started Southeast Michigan, 300 some odd funds, 200 some odd $1 million, and then we were, thousands of funds, 1,700, whatever it was, at, 19 years later. You have to plan for that growth. So at some point in time, there are sophisticated accounting systems they can point you to that track all of this, and if you're in the foundation world, there's all sorts of foundation software. What do you guys use now?
Fondant.
They use Foundant. There's different providers that will segregate and manage all these separate funds for you and all that kind of stuff, but it depends on where you are on your longevity or continuum.
One more question back here.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Stokes, and I'm on the board at Washington Heights. One of the questions, what I wanted you to touch on is whether or not nonprofits need to invest in officers and directors insurance, and if so, how do we go about getting that? If you can just give us some insight.
Again, they probably have some sources for you, but like if you become a member of CMF or MNA, I think they actually have like group discount programs and all where you can buy it.
Michigan Nonprofit
Yeah, Michigan
Association.
Nonprofit Association and all, they have like group, insurance for their members that you can, it's like AARP, right? It's like you go and you get a discount because you're a member, okay? Keep in mind, D&O insurance, you have to look at what the policy actually covers, okay? D&O insurance usually only covers third-party claims against the organization. It doesn't, so if you have an officer that steals a bunch of money, that's not a third-party claim. That's you trying to get money back for the fact that he messed up or she messed up, right? There has to be a third-party claim, and it usually covers, my experience is usually worker-related, like employment claims against the board, okay? You need to have like your general liability policy. You need to have, but some insurance carriers will actually cover criminal, theft policies. Mm-hmm. They'll have theft policies so that if somebody embezzles money from inside the organization, you have coverage. So talk to your agent about what it is and what it covers, okay? Because D&O is not, a lot of people think D&O is like the be-all and end-all. It's not. Mm-mm. So there's other policies you have to look at too.
Robin, the clear answer is yes, you should have DNO.
Yes, you should have clear, but
and then look a little deeper, yes.
I just want to make sure you understand there's limits on what DNO covers.
Can we say too that it doesn't cost a lot, so don't sleep on it. Like, don't wait. Go buy that policy. Talk to Kyle at Wargis. They'll hook you up.
There you go.
Jeremy's tip in the back of the room.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's what we're here for, right? Is learning from each other and collaborating. Yes. Okay, that's about this whole thing. But just make sure you know what it is you're buying, is what I'm saying. Okay. Next.
Do we have another question over here? No? Okay. Other questions?
Okay. Thank you for putting up with my opinions. I do like a quote from, it's been attributed to me by Ben Franklin. I'm not sure I've been able to find it, which is, If you don't mind me offering my opinion, I won't mind if you don't accept it. So if you don't follow my advice, that's fine. I just want to make sure that you guys got some ideas to think about. Again, it's hard. It's not easy. But there's a lot of you with each other that you can talk through these issues and figure them out. And if nothing else, just, again, go away with my sincere gratitude for the fact that you do what you do, because you make your communities better and stronger because you guys have stepped into the fray and done it. So thank you for that, okay?